Have you ever wondered what a Yenko is? Well, we'll have to dive deep into the origin stories of this to appreciate what special cars these are. And where this story starts? Pennsylvania. Don Yenko grew up in Bentleyville, Pennsylvania. He learned to fly an airplane at the age of 16, went on to serve for the United States Air Force before attending Penn State. While a student at Penn State, he actually started his first flying club and was the president of the debating club and a member of Kappa Delta Rho fraternity. Trust me, the flying part's important. In the 50s and 60s, though, Don Yenko was an internationally acclaimed endurance racer and SCCA four-time driving champion. But he wanted that performance offered to everyone. So what did he do? In 1965, he released a version of the Chevrolet Corvair and named it the Stinger, a 240 horsepower bona fide Porsche 911 killer. And this was going to be the first of many for Don Yenko, as more doors would open for him. The Stinger was a hit. Yenko was able to prove to General Motors that he could build a true performance car, even with an economy vehicle. Of course, the hope was to persuade General Motors into authorizing a, quote, Yenko Corvette. But GM is stubborn, and instead bestowed Yenko with another car, which subsequently had a greater effect on General Motors than they could ever have predicted. In the late 60s, Ford had the cat's meow with the Mustang, and even more success in racing competitions when they gave it to a legend, Carroll Shelby, which translated into more showroom sales. So it's inevitable that GM releases its own version, the Camaro. As a Chevy product, it was delivered to a Yenko dealership where some of its shortcomings became abundantly clear. You see, General Motors actually limited the Camaro to engine displacement of no more than 400 cubic inches. Ford and Mopar didn't have such limitations on their products, and the Camaro suffered as a result. The car was routinely disgraced at the track and even more often at the drag strip. Don Yenko ordered an estimated 50 SS Camaros in '67, and what he did with them would go down in the history books. Don Yenko received his order of SS Camaros in '67. Already packed with an already decent 396 L78 engine, it just wasn't good enough. So Don Yenko turned to famous builders, such as Dick Harrell, Mr. Chevrolet himself, as well as Bill Thomas, who famously created the Cheetah, the race car that was meant to kill the Cobra. Yup, that Cheetah. So they quickly went to work and started doing conversions to the 67 Camaros and swapping the 396 for an L72 Corvette 427 cubic inch engine, underrated at 425 horsepower. And on top of it, several upgrades happened throughout the entire vehicle. A new rear end, a heavy-duty suspension, unique fiberglass Stinger hoods and graphics. The result was the first of the famous Yenko Camaros. And this was going to be a firm message to Chevrolet. Yenko had a bulletproof recipe. When you're a good chef with a good recipe, what better way than put it on other dishes? Yenko moved on to cars such as the Chevelle, shoehorning the same L72 427 engine into making them fast. But not just the Chevelle, the Nova as well, which was insane at the time putting this kind of engine in such a small car. But times were changing and the EPA was introduced. Thanks, Nixon. And it would take its toll on performance cars of that time and in the future. So instead of the 427, Yenko had no choice but to fit the Nova with a small block with some performance upgrades to still make it relevant. And by 1971, Yenko wanted to make the Stinger 2, which was a Chevrolet Vega. Car featured a high compression 2.3 aluminum block, but because of restrictions, he had to sell the turbo separately for installation. Fast forward to 1981, Yenko's final modified Chevy was the Turbo Z Camaro, a 350 small block with a turbocharger with no wastegate or any priority valve to rest assured that there was no turbo lag, which plagued the turbocharged vehicles of those days. Only 19 of these cars were ever produced, and Yenko would have continued building these types of vehicles if it weren't for a terrible tragedy. Don Yenko sold his famous dealership in 1982, but stayed active in customizing, catalog flying, occasional races, and playing piano. Don Yenko had a business idea, so he took a business trip in his airplane to go pick up his colleague. And on March 5th, 1987, Yenko landed hard, with his airplane causing him to lose control, dive into a ravine, and crash. There were also reports of witnesses stating that it looked like he was trying to correct himself on landing, but it just wasn't good enough. The idea of having a car that retains the spirit of perhaps Chevrolet's most recognized performance guru, Don Yenko, set out to be Chevrolet's answer to Ford's Carroll Shelby, and to a great degree to achieve this. His contributions to the automotive world cannot be overlooked. He is widely respected as a racer, a builder, by even the most die-hard Ford and Mopar people too. With that, you get more than a car, you get part of a legend. But Don Yenko's legacy lives on through his daughter and physician, Lynn. At the 2009 SEMA show in Las Vegas, a factory-built concept car honoring Yenko, a 2010 Camaro featuring an LS3 6.2 V8 producing somewhere between 500 and 600 horsepower, was introduced. But through Lynn and Specialty Vehicle Engineering, or otherwise known as SVE, you can get modern cars today that still continue that Yenko nameplate. Whether it be a Camaro of 800 horsepower, 1,000 horsepower, 1,100 horsepower, just obnoxious numbers to really justify the Yenko name being on the car. They even made a Silverado version that pumps out 800 horsepower. And even the car he always wanted to build, the Chevrolet Corvette. All these builds are complete with the hockey stripes, the SYC badges, everything that Yenko would have put on the vehicle. Sure, it's missing the classic 427. But to think a bigger motor is all you need to go faster, you're missing the point entirely. It was about going fast. Whether through a 2.3 liter aluminum block on a Chevrolet Vega, a small turbocharged Corvair, Yenko was more than V8s. He was the godfather of what Chevrolet performance could possibly be. And he was, in my opinion, what Carroll Shelby is to Ford, he was to Chevrolet. And a lot of these cars that we see today wouldn't even be possible without Don Yenko's help. Such as the Central Office Production Order, or COPO program, would not exist without Don Yenko's help. And in 1969, when Chevrolet released the ZL1, that was even in part due to Don Yenko's help. So when we look at a ZL1 today, it honestly, in my opinion, would not be possible. It still wouldn't live today without the help of Don Yenko himself. All these amazing cars that we look at is a little bit of history and where this all started when Don Yenko was racing cars.